Dawn came like an apology. Soft light bled through the torn clouds, spilling across the wreckage of mountains and ruined temples. The storm had passed, leaving behind silence so heavy it felt sacred. For the first time in centuries, the air tasted clean. No ash, no iron, no blood. Only dew, the faint perfume of earth reborn. Irith sat among the shattered pillars, his head bowed, his hands trembling in his lap. The bronze of his armor was cracked and dull. The crimson cloak, torn and blackened at the edges, fluttered weakly in the wind. The glow in his eyes had gone out. He was not a god anymore, just a man. Around him, the remnants of divine war whispered their farewells. The stones of the temple sighed. The ocean far below murmured against the cliffs. Even the wind carried a low hum, as though the world itself was humming a dirge for what had been lost. He didn't know how long he sat there. Hours, days, or maybe longer. Grief has no measure of time. Every breath hurt not from the wounds, but from the absence. The gods were gone, buried beneath his sorrow, swallowed by the very world they had once ruled. And Mirin, she had not returned since the mountain fell silent. Her voice lingered like an echo on the edge of hearing, soft as the sigh of a dream. Sometimes when the wind moved just right, he could almost make out the words, live. Aerith, that's the greater punishment. He wanted to argue with her. He wanted to say that living in an empty world was no punishment. It was mercy. But deep down, he knew she was right. Living meant remembering, and remembrance was the heaviest curse of all. When night came again, the stars felt strange and too near, too bright. They burned with colors unseen before, constellations shifting like living things. Aerith rose slowly, his body aching, and began to walk down the mountain. The forest at its base was alive again. Trees that had burned in divine fire now stood taller, their leaves humming faintly with golden veins. Small creatures, deer, foxes, birds, emerged from the shadows, their eyes reflecting faint traces of starlight. None fled from him. They watched in silence, as if recognizing something older than fear. He came to a stream and knelt beside it, cupping the water in his hands. The reflection that looked back was not the warrior he remembered. His hair was streaked with white, his face carved by grief and time, but beneath his skin, faint as a ghost, the ember still glowed. It pulsed once, a slow, quiet heartbeat, then stilled. Not yet, he whispered to himself. Not yet. For days he wandered, through villages rebuilt from ashes, through fields where the soil still remembered the warmth of gods. Wherever he passed, strange things followed, torches that would not go out, flowers that bloomed at night, children born with eyes the color of fire. The people called him the last prophet, though he spoke no prophecy. He was simply walking home, but there was no home left. Solanar was gone, swallowed by the sea. Elaris lay in ruins, its temples buried beneath vines. Even the sun seemed hesitant now, rising and setting like a tired heart. One night, beneath a crimson moon, he reached the edge of the world. There, at the cliff's rim, stood a small shrine of stones, old, broken, covered in moss, and in the center, lying untouched by wind or time, burned a single ember. It pulsed faintly, the last remnant of divine fire. The fire that had begun all wars. The fire that had refused to die. Aerith sank to his knees before it. He reached out, and the ember brightened as though recognizing him. For a moment, the entire horizon lit up, sea and sky painted in molten gold. He smiled, weary and human. You're still here. The ember flared once, like a heartbeat, then dimmed. He cupped it gently, between his scarred palms. The heat didn't burn him. It felt almost like warmth returning to frozen blood. He thought of Mirin. He thought of Lysandra. He thought of every soul that had fallen, every god that had bled, and he whispered, I'll keep you, but I'll never use you again. He stayed there until the stars began to fade. When morning came, the birds sang. The tide rose. The ember pulsed again softly, and for the first time, Aerith felt peace. He stood, wrapping the ember in his cloak, and turned toward the forest once more. Somewhere deep among the trees he heard laughter, light, distant, familiar. A girl's voice. He followed it without fear, and as he walked, His shadow began to fade, blending into the gold-tinged light of dawn. The wind carried the scent of fire and moonlight, and for a heartbeat the world felt whole again. Far behind him, on the cliff's edge, the shrine of stones cracked. A faint whisper rose from within the earth, not in anger, but in promise. The gods sleep, but the ember dreams. And so the story of Aerith, the hollow crown, the fallen warrior of Aegeon, ended not in battle, but in silence. No one sang songs of him. No temples bore his likeness. Only the forests remembered the warmth of his passing. But sometimes, on nights when lightning crawled over the sea and the moon turned red, travelers swore they saw a man standing by the cliffs, cloak fluttering, eyes glowing faintly like dying coals. Watching, waiting, guarding the fire that would not die. The end. The last ember. A silence that feels like the breath before another beginning. The storm never stopped. For 7 nights, thunder crawled across the sky like beasts of light devouring the clouds. The sea boiled beneath it, tides rising higher with every pulse of golden lightning. Across the dying empire, people whispered prayers, not to one god, but to any who might still be listening, and they listened. Beneath the ruins of Solanar, the bones of ancient titans stirred. Beneath the forests of Elaris, shadows took the shape of beasts thought long forgotten. And in the cities where mortals built towers from arrogance and gold, statues began to bleed. Aerith walked through it all like a ghost in a world he no longer belonged to. His every step left trails of ember light on the ground. His breath shimmered with heat. He had not slept, had not eaten. He had become firewalking in the shape of man, and yet inside that burning silence, something human still throbbed. A fragment of regret, a sliver of love, a whisper of the boy he once was. He followed Mirin's voice, always her voice. She led him through dreams, through half-remembered memories, through the thin veil between waking and sleep. In one dream he stood in a field of glass where stars bloomed like flowers. In another he saw her standing by the ocean's edge, her feet sinking into black sand as waves carried whispers from the underworld. Each vision burned into him, guiding him deeper into the storm's heart. By the time he reached the mountain of Elarion, the world had begun to crumble. The skies tore open like wounds. The rivers turned to mirrors, and from the north came the first god. She descended not from the heavens, but from within the earth itself, the mother of silence, whose eyes were twin voids of night, and whose skin shimmered with shifting constellations. Her presence bent the air around her, as though even reality hesitated to exist too close to her. Formed mortals who saw her went blind with awe. Priests fell to their knees and forgot the words of their prayers. Children cried out, names that had not been spoken in 1,000 years. Aerith stood on the mountain's edge and watched her rise. His heart pounding like a forge, he spoke, his voice trembling. "What are you?" Her reply came not as sound but as thought, a thunderous whisper blooming inside his skull. "I am what came before the gods you burned." He clenched his fists. "And what do you want?" "Balance," she said. "The world is cracked, and through you fire bleeds where it should not. You carry the spark that unmade the heavens. I didn't ask for it." The air darkened around her. Mortals never do. From the horizon, more figures began to appear. Colossal silhouettes moving through the storm. Gods of oceans and frost. Gods of wind and hunger. Gods so vast that mountains bowed under their weight. Their voices rolled across the land like earthquakes. Each god carried memories older than time, their wrath born not from malice, but from being forgotten. And at their center stood the hollow crown, the man once called Aerith, the unwilling herald of their awakening. Mirin appeared again, her form woven from mist and moonlight standing before him. Her expression was no longer sorrowful. It was resolute. "This is what you opened," she said softly. "You burned the veil. You called them back." Aerith shook his head, his voice breaking. "Then tell me how to send them back." She stepped closer, her face illuminated by the lightning dancing across the storm. "You can't send them back. The world must choose the age of gods or the age of men." He laughed bitterly. "Then it's already over." Mirin placed her hand against his chest, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, he felt warmth, not flame. Not yet. "There's one thing even gods can't control." He looked into her eyes. What? Remorse. At that word, the storm froze. The gods stopped their advance. Every creature, mortal or divine, turned toward Aerith, and from deep within him, the crown began to hum. It wasn't rage this time. It wasn't vengeance. It was memory. The echo of every soul lost in Solanar, every scream, every prayer unanswered. All of it flowed into the hollow crown, through him, becoming him. He fell to his knees, gripping his chest as golden fire erupted from his veins. The ground split open, blinding light bursting outward like the dawn of a second creation. The gods screamed. One by one, their forms began to shatter, not destroyed, but remembered. Their power folded back into the earth, into stone, into sea, into sky, returning them to the bones of the world from which they had come. Mirin's voice echoed through the storm. Do not destroy them. Bury them in your sorrow. He reached upward, roaring as the flames turned white. The storm collapsed inward, swallowing everything, and gods, light, sky, until all that remained was silence. When the light faded, Aerith was alone atop the mountain. No fire, no thunder, no gods, just the soft whisper of wind over stone. The crown was gone. His body, scorched and bleeding, was once again mortal. He looked down at his hand, scarred, burned, trembling, and for the first time in years, he felt cold. Mirin stood beside him, her form dim, almost transparent. It's done, he whispered. She nodded. For now. But remember, gods never die. They wait. He turned toward her. Then I'll wait with them. She smiled faintly. No, Aerith, you'll live. That's the greater punishment. Her light flickered, fading into the mist. And as dawn broke over the ruined horizon, he realized what he had become. Not a savior, not a destroyer, but the memory of both. The age of gods had ended. The age of man had begun. But somewhere in the wind, the old voices whispered still. Ash to ash, fire to fire. The crown sleeps, but dreams. Crown sleeps, but dreams. When Aerith opened his eyes, the world was unrecognizable. The marble halls of Solanar lay in ruin, molten gold dripping down from the temple spires. The streets burned silently, and not with flame, but with light so still and pure it refused to flicker. Every sound had been swallowed, every cry stolen by the air itself. The once mighty capital of the Southern Empire had become a city of silent fire. He rose to his feet slowly, his shadow stretching and breaking apart across the ash. The crown fused into his skin, pulsed with a deep hum that echoed through his bones. The sky above glowed red, and a wound bleeding across eternity. In that stillness, only the wind moved, carrying the scent of iron, smoke, and something else, grief. The bodies of soldiers and priests lay scattered, their armor melted into their flesh. The great statues of the archons wept streams of molten glass. And in the heart of the temple, where the sacred flame had once burned, stood a single figure, still untouched, and horribly calm. It was Archon Valus. His robes were scorched, his staff broken, but his eyes burned brighter than ever, white, hollow, consumed by something far beyond human comprehension. He spoke, his voice echoing like it came from inside the stone walls themselves. Do you see now, my son, what happens when gods forget mercy? Aerith's voice was hoarse. This wasn't me. Valus smiled, a fractured, blood-stained grin. Then who was it? You carry her flame. You are the answer to every prayer we feared. The wind howled through the broken windows, scattering ashes into spirals. Aerith took a step forward. You used me to bring her back. Valus raised his trembling hands toward the ruined sky. And she answered. He pointed at the horizon, where the clouds twisted into shapes like wings, like eyes, like ancient faces watching through the veil of time. The gods of the old world return.
Aerith, and through your fire the gate is open. Aerith looked down at his hands, light pulsing beneath his skin.
Gold veins shifting like living serpents. Every heartbeat sent a tremor through the ground, he whispered. Then I'll close it. Valus's laughter broke the silence. You can't close what you are. You are the flame that forgets to die. In a sudden flash, Aerith moved, a blur of motion, the crown blazing. His hand closed around Valus's throat, lifting him from the floor. You built this, Aerith hissed. You turned faith into a weapon. Valus' eyes glowed brighter, his voice gurgling but unwavering. And now you'll finish it. Then, with his final breath, he whispered, She's awake. Aerith's grip tightened, and the Archon disintegrated into ash, vanishing into the wind like smoke from an ancient pyre. Outside, the ground split open, the streets of Solanar convulsed, as if the earth itself was exhaling centuries of buried rage. Flames rose from the cracks, not red, not orange, but silver and gold, weaving patterns like ancient runes across the city's corpse. Aerith fell to his knees, his vision blurred with pain. Every heartbeat was an explosion, every breath a storm. The light from his crown spread through the streets, chasing shadows, burning everything in its path. Through the haze, he saw her again, Mirin standing among the ruin. Untouched by flame or frost, her voice came like a memory echoing through the bones of the earth. "You did this." He stared at her. No, they did. Her eyes, cold, distant, and shimmering with stars, never blinked. "You carried the spark. You lit the fire," he reached out, desperate.
"Tell me how to stop it."
But her expression softened, not with pity, but with ancient sadness. "You don't stop what you are. Aerith, you learned to burn differently." As her form faded, the storm above began to pulse, waves of light rippling through the clouds like the heartbeat of some colossal, unseen being. From the mountains to the sea, people looked up and saw the sky open. They saw faces in the lightning, heard whispers in the thunder, and they began to remember. Every myth, every prayer, every forgotten story of the god, all of it rushed back into the hearts of men. Temples that had stood empty for centuries began to glow with ghostly light. The world was waking from its long sleep, and at the center of it all, the hollow crown burned, not as a savior, not as a god, but as a wound that refused to heal. By nightfall, the flames had swallowed Solanar whole. What remained was a crater of gold and black glass, reflecting the stars like a mirror of the heavens. From that pit, a single figure walked out, his cloak burned away, his crown fused into his skull, his eyes glowing like dying suns. He no longer felt human. He no longer felt alive. He could hear every prayer in the world, whispering through the wind. Some begged for mercy. Some called for vengeance. All of them reached for him, and deep beneath it all, under the ash, under the sorrow, he heard Mirin's voice once more. "The gate is open. The gods will return. And when they do, you must choose." "Choose what?" he whispered. "Which world burns first?" He turned toward the horizon, where the black ocean shimmered under the moonlight. Behind him, the city that had crowned him as a god was nothing more than dust and echo. He began to walk into the wasteland, into legend, into madness, as the last ember of Solanar died behind him. The crown hummed against his skull, alive with the whispers of 1,000 dead prayers. And far above, among the trembling stars, something vast began to move, a shadow older than the world itself, smiling. The kingdoms of men had forgotten the language of gods, or so they claimed. Yet when the storm of gold and frost swept across their skies, every crown trembled as if remembering its origin. For 3 nights and 3 days, no sun rose. The clouds burned with light, shifting between silver and flame. The seas boiled beneath ice that refused to melt. And in every city, every field, people heard a voice in their sleep. "The balance has awoken." No one knew what it meant, but kings felt it in their blood, the old fear of losing control to something greater than themselves. The temples reopened, the pyres were rebuilt, and on every altar the priest placed 2 candles, one that burned white, one that burned gold. The prophecy had returned. The hollow crown would rise again, the ruler without soul or flesh, born from the union of flame and frost. Some said it would bring peace. Others, annihilation. In the shattered north, beneath the crystal cliffs, Aerith wandered through storms that no mortal could endure. His cloak was tattered, his breath thick with smoke. Each step he took left trails of ash in the snow. He no longer knew if he was walking toward life or death. He only knew the voice inside him whispered more often now, not just as words, but as visions, faces, fire, her. Sometimes, he saw Mirin standing among the ruins of her lost village, the snow glowing faintly gold around her. Other times she stood beside him, silent, her gaze heavy with sorrow. And sometimes when he closed his eyes, he saw her sitting upon a throne of ice and flame, crowned in light, her expression unreadable. He would whisper into the storm, "Tell me what you want." But she never answered. In the city of Solanar, the Southern Empire's golden capital, the high clerics gathered in their marble halls. Their leader, Archon Velis, held in his trembling hands a shard of black glass, the last fragment of the monastery bells that tolled before the world burned. Within it shimmered the faint reflection of a woman's face, half fire, half frost. "The hollow crown has found its vessel," he said. "The boy of the north. The spark of the old goddess lives in him." "What must we do?" asked the council. "What all men do when gods return," Velis whispered. "We chain them and call it worship." Aerith was found days later by the scouts of Solanar, half dead, frozen to his knees in the snow. They carried him in chains to the capital, though the metal hissed and melted wherever it touched his skin. He awoke in the great hall before the Archon, surrounded by torches that flickered with unnatural light. "Do you know who you are?" Velis asked. Aerith's eyes glowed faintly gold and blue. "No one should." The Archon smiled. "Then allow us to remind you." He lifted the shard of black glass, and in its reflection, Aerith saw her again, Mirin, her eyes vast as eternity. The voice that followed came not from the Archon, but from within the shard itself. "He carries what was broken. He bears what was mine." The torches flared. The marble cracked. The priests fell to their knees as the hall filled with a low hum, the same ancient resonance that once shook mountains. Velis looked upon Aerith and saw not a man, but a doorway. "The goddess still sleeps," he whispered. "And through you she dreams." They crowned him that night, not as king but as relic, a living symbol of divine power to rally the empire. The people called him the Hollow Crown, the flame that walks in mortal form. He said nothing, but, as the Archon placed the iron circlet upon his head, the cold metal hissed and fused to his skin. His veins burned with light, the room filled with whispers, not from the living, but from the thousands of prayers buried beneath the temple floors. He realized then that every time someone prayed, it fed her, and through him, she stirred. Days turned into weeks. The empire began to change. Rivers froze under sunlight. Fires burned underwater. Dreams bled into waking life. In distant lands, people began to see strange phenomena. Statues weeping molten gold, shadows glowing faintly blue. Children were born with eyes of two colors. The old gods, once silent, began to stir from their graves of stone. The balance was shifting again. Aerith spent his nights in solitude, watching the city lights flicker below. The world was collapsing, and rising at once, and he, its unwilling heart, could only wait for the next wave. Mirin's voice came to him again, softer this time. "You wear the crown they forged for me." He looked up into the darkness. "Why did you choose me?" "I didn't," she said. "You chose yourself when you remembered me." "Then why am I still here?" "Because gods don't die, Aerith. They echo." Her form flickered before him, faint as smoke. She reached out, not to comfort, but to remind. "When I fell, I broke the world trying to save it. Don't make the same mistake." He reached for her hand, and his fingers passed through light. When he looked again, she was gone. The next morning, Archon Velis gathered the armies. He declared that the Hollow Crown would march east to restore the balance, to burn away the heresies of those who refused to kneel. Aerith stood before tens of thousands, warriors, priests, zealots, all chanting his name. The sky above burned gold. He raised his hand to silence them. His voice echoed across the plain. "I am not your god." The crowd roared anyway, and somewhere, high above, thunder rolled, as if laughing. That night, as he lay in the darkness, the crown pulsed against his head, heavy, alive. He whispered, "Mirin, if you can hear me, tell me how this ends." The only reply was her echo in the wind. All flames end the same way, in smoke. When he awoke, the capital was burning. Centuries passed, or perhaps it was days. Time no longer moved the same after the storm. The valley that once held Mirin's final cry became a basin of silent snow. Nothing grew there, not even shadows, and yet, every night when the moon rose over the white expanse, faint shapes shimmered in the frost, the outlines of faces, arms, eyes, the echoes of those who once prayed. The world called it the hollow sky, a place where the wind spoke and the air remembered. Travelers who strayed too close said they heard music, a hum low and warm, stitched with whispers of flame. Some claimed to see her figure walking across the snow, barefoot, cloaked in light. They built shrines along the borders, small ones at first, a few candles, a feather, a word of prayer, then larger temples, their marble walls carved with spirals of ash and snow. Priests sang of balance, of warmth within cold, of the goddess who gave everything to silence the war of the elements. And though her name was forgotten, her story survived, twisted, fragmented, told in 1,000 tongues. In one such temple, high atop the cliffs of Mir, a boy was born beneath a blood moon. His first cry cracked the altar stone. The priests, terrified and awed, declared him the heir of the flame that sleeps. They named him Aerith. He grew pale as winter, yet when angered, his skin shimmered faintly gold. The high priest believed the goddess had placed her spark within him, a promise that she would rise again through mortal flesh. Aerith did not want to be divine. He dreamt of forests, of rivers, of a woman with eyes like eclipses walking barefoot through falling snow. He did not know her name, but he felt her sorrow like a wound that had never healed. Every night he woke to find frost on his breath and embers glowing in his palms. "Your gift must not be wasted," said the priests. "The world burns again in the east. Balance must return." But Aerith felt no balance, only hunger, only emptiness. When he prayed, the sky remained silent. When he cried out to the goddess in his dreams, she turned away, her outline fading into light. Still, her sigil appeared wherever he went, in the reflection of still water, in the ashes of the temple candles. Once, carved into his own shadow, by his 18th year he could no longer deny it. The flame inside him wanted release. One night as the temple slept, Aerith climbed the steps of the great bell tower, the same kind that once tolled for Mirin. The air shimmered with cold. Snow began to fall, though it was midsummer. He reached the top and looked across the endless white below. The world was beautiful and broken, all ice and ruin, all silence pretending to be peace. He whispered, "If you can hear me, tell me what you want from me." And the wind answered, not as sound but as warmth against his cheek. A voice inside him, old and weary, spoke, "I want to end." Aerith gasped. "Who are you?" "The one who began." Lightning flared across the sky, blue and gold intertwined. The sigil of ash and snow burned above the horizon, pulsing like a heartbeat. The temple bells began to toll by themselves. Below, priests stumbled from their beds, kneeling in terror. "It's her," they cried. "She returns through the chosen vessel." But Aerith wasn't listening. The voice inside him was growing stronger, bleeding through every thought. "Do you feel it? The hunger? The ache for silence?" He dropped to his knees, clutching his chest. "Make it stop." "You cannot stop what you are, child of my echo," it whispered. "You are the memory of my mistake. You are my unending prayer." His body began to glow, faint at first, then blinding. His veins shone like molten rivers. His eyes turned white. The priests called it a miracle. Aerith called it possession. By dawn, the temple was gone. What remained was a spiral burned into the snow, half gold, half blue. At its center, Aerith stood trembling, the last of the embers flickering beneath his skin. He had seen her, truly seen her, in the storm of light. She was both beautiful and monstrous, her face shifting between fire and frost, her voice a chorus of every prayer ever uttered in her name. "I never wanted them to worship me," she had said. "But they did, and now so will you." Before he could answer, the vision shattered. He woke with blood on his hands and ash in his hair, and when he looked up, the sky burned faintly gold. Far away in the ruins of the old monasteries, the Order of Horus stirred again. Their new prophet, blind and cold, declared that the goddess of dual light had chosen a mortal son to reopen the seal. To awaken the balance once more, armies began to march. Cities prepared altars, and in every dream, people saw her sigil etched upon the stars. The sky itself had remembered her name. That winter, when the first storm of living snow returned, Aerith understood what she meant. The hunger was not hers alone. It was the world's. Fire needed cold. Cold needed fire. Creation was nothing without ruin. He walked into the heart of the hollow sky, where her body of light had once dissolved into mist. The air was still. The ground sang faintly underfoot, humming with memory. He knelt, pressing his palms to the ice. "Tell me what you want," he whispered again. This time there was no answer, only warmth blooming beneath his hands. The sigil reappeared, brighter than ever, and for the briefest moment, he felt her beside him, whispering through his pulse, "Finish what I could not." The ground split open, and from the depths, something ancient stirred, neither god nor mortal, neither her nor him. A being of ash and snow, flame and frost, born from prayer and regret. The cycle had begun again. The cycle had begun again. In the months that followed, Mirin stayed hidden among the villagers of the valley, the last place untouched by the ruin of flame and frost. She had thought herself invisible, a stranger among humble souls trying to survive. But even silence has a shape, and hers had begun to cast shadows of worship. Every night when she walked to the frozen well to fetch water, she found new symbols carved into the ice. Spirals of black soot, circles of white ash pressed into the snow. The people claimed it was the balance's mark, the blessing of the goddess who walked among them. She tried to erase them, but each morning they returned, larger, sharper, more intricate. By the 7th day they glowed faintly in the dark. One dawn, Mirin awoke to chanting outside her hut. Dozens of villagers stood in the snow, faces painted, with ash and frost, hands raised toward the pale light creeping over the mountains. The elder approached her, bowing low. "Lady Mirin, the world beyond burns again," we prayed, and the frost answered. "You heard us." "I didn't," she said, voice trembling. "I'm no goddess." The elder's eyes shone. "Then what are you?" She had no answer. Behind him the crowd began to hum, low and rhythmic like the sound of a storm trapped beneath the earth. It wasn't a song anymore. It was a pulse, a heartbeat shared between hundreds. She felt it vibrate through her chest, through his spark that lived inside her. The ground shivered in response. Snowflakes swirled upward instead of down. The villagers fell to their knees. "Lady of ash and snow," they cried. And in the heavens thunder rolled, though there were no clouds. The following nights blurred together. The villagers stopped speaking her name directly. Instead they whispered titles: the frosted flame, the heart of still fire, she who breathes both winter and dawn. They built altars at the edge of the village, towering sculptures of glassy ice threaded with burning coals. Children laid offerings of feathers and bones before them. The sick pressed their foreheads to the cold, praying for her touch. And sometimes, without meaning to, she answered. A dying man with frostbite took her hand, and his blackened skin began to glow faintly, turning to ash, then to living flesh. He called her salvation. But when she pulled away, she saw that her palm still smoked. Each act of mercy left her colder inside. Each miracle fed the ember that refused to die. One night she dreamed again of him. He sat upon a throne of molten rock and frozen bone, the air shimmering around his body. His eyes burned with the color of dying stars. "You see now?" he whispered. "This is how gods are born, not through war but worship. You gave them warmth in their frost, and they gave you meaning. It is the oldest pact. I never wanted this. No one ever does. Even I was mortal once. But devotion is a disease, Mirin. It spreads faster than fire and lives longer than ice." She turned her face away. "I will end it." He laughed softly, that same low sound that once made mountains quake. "Then end yourself and watch what happens when they start praying to your memory." When she woke, the snow outside her hut was red. At first she thought it was dawn's reflection. Then she saw the bodies, animals, birds, a few humans, arranged in circles, their blood steaming faintly against the cold. The elder approached her again, his robes stained with soot. They would not stop the fire beyond the ridge, he said quietly. So we gave them to you, lady. We offered what we could. Her voice broke. You killed for me. For balance, he corrected, eyes serene, for the frosted flame. Mirin stumbled backward, heart pounding. The air around her shimmered, heat and cold, clashing invisibly. You don't understand, she whispered. Every drop of blood wakes him. But the villagers were smiling now, kneeling, whispering her name like a spell. Their faces shone with devotion, and something darker. In that moment she saw it clearly. Their souls had begun to change. Their eyes glowed faintly gold and white, just like hers. The spark was spreading. For days, she tried to flee. Each path she took led her back to the village. Every tree she passed bore the mark of ash and snow. The horizon folded upon itself, looping like a dream refusing to end. On the 10th day, she realized why. The valley was no longer part of the mortal world. It was a reflection of her own mind, twisted into a landscape of endless frost and fire. And the people within it, her worshippers, were fragments of her guilt, her grief, and his lingering flame. Every prayer they uttered was a piece of her memory calling back to life. She screamed into the wind, "You're not real!" The villagers only smiled, whispering, "All gods say that at first." That night a storm rose unlike any other, a blizzard of burning snow. Flames drifted like feathers, frost hissed like serpents. At the center of it all stood Mirin, her body aglow with two lights, one golden, one blue. Her cloak whipped around her as she fell to her knees, clutching her chest. The voice within her, his voice, and had grown too loud to ignore. "Let me free and I will spare them," he whispered. "You cannot hold both worlds forever. Release me, and you'll rest." She shook her head violently. "If I let you out, the world burns." "Then let it burn," he said softly. "Fire gives life. Cold kills. Choose, Mirin. Become me, or end us both." The wind screamed around her, tearing at the earth. The villagers knelt, arms raised toward the storm, chanting louder than ever. Their eyes bled light. Mirin rose slowly, her expression unreadable, and then, in a voice that was both hers and his, she whispered, "Let the world decide." She thrust her hands skyward. Lightning of flame and frost split the heavens. The valley vanished in blinding white, and the echo of her scream rolled across eternity. When the light faded, there was no valley, no village, no Mirin, only snow, glowing faintly with embers, and above it, etched into the sky, the sigil of ash and snow, forever burning, forever frozen, the first sign of a new god. For 3 days, Mirin wandered across the wasteland that had once been her homeland. The air hung heavy, neither warm nor cold, a dead stillness between seasons. The sun was only a pale coin behind shrouds of ash, and her shadow followed her like a wounded creature flickering between light and smoke. No birds called, no insects sang, only the sound of her boots breaking thin crusts of frost over blackened soil. Everywhere she looked, the world bore scars. Trees turned to glass by sudden freezing, rivers frozen mid-current, and shapes half human, half statue locked in silent agony. Their eyes were wide as though they had seen something too vast to understand in their final moments. She whispered once to one of them, a woman whose face still glowed faintly with embers under the ice, "I didn't mean to end you." The statue's lips cracked as the frost shifted, releasing a faint whisper that might have been, "We were already ending." That night, Mirin found shelter beneath the ribs of a petrified giant, an ancient titan fossilized by her own hand. She built a fire from driftwood that refused to burn properly, giving off pale blue flames instead of orange. She sat by it, shivering despite the glow, staring into the flickering heart of the fire. There, in the trembling core, she saw 2 shadows, one of herself, one of him. His voice reached her again, faint but unmistakable. Do you see what happens when fire and frost meet, little dream? Balance is illusion. One must devour the other. She pressed her hands to her ears. You're gone. You're dead, the fire laughed. Gods do not die, Mirin. They change their shape. You froze my body, but my spark lives in you now. Every breath you take feeds me. Her stomach turned cold. She could feel it. The flicker deep inside her chest. That faint warmth that wouldn't fade. It pulsed with her heartbeat, whispering in rhythm. Burn, burn, burn. She grabbed a handful of snow and shoved it into her mouth, choking on the icy water as it melted. It didn't help. The warmth stayed. By morning, she saw movement on the horizon, something walking slowly across the white expanse. She readied the dagger she still carried, though the blade looked brittle, rimed with frost. As the figure drew closer, she saw it was a man, or what was left of one. Half his body was charred to bone. The other half shimmered with frost. His eyes glowed dimly, one golden, one pale blue. He walked with the grace of something that didn't belong to either world anymore. When he finally stood before her, he smiled faintly. You did what none could and froze a god, and yet look at you. You carry his flame still. Who are you? She asked. A witness, he said softly. Once I was priest to the fire. Now I serve whatever remains. He circled her slowly, studying her aura as though it were scripture. You are neither mortal nor divine. You are between. The frost keeps the flame alive, and the flame keeps the frost from dying. You've made a new god, inside yourself. Mirin stepped back. No, I want it gone. The priest tilted his head. Then you must burn the frost, or freeze the fire. Either way, the world will follow. His words fell like judgment, and then he simply turned and began to walk away, dissolving into mist before she could speak again. For hours she walked in silence, trying to escape the voice within, but the world around her began to shift, subtly, terrifyingly. Patches of earth where her footsteps lingered too long began to thaw, revealing glowing embers beneath. In others, her breath froze into crystalline flowers that refused to melt. Wherever she went, creation and ruin followed like twin shadows. She realized then that she wasn't just walking through the aftermath. She was rewriting it. Her presence was reshaping reality, deciding which parts would freeze and which would burn. And the land responded. On the third day, she came upon a small village, untouched by the fire, untouched by frost. People lived there still, though they looked hollow, their eyes reflecting the strange twilight of her world. When they saw her, they knelt. Lady of ash and snow, one whispered. The dream that walks. Mirin's throat tightened. No, please, I'm not. The villagers lifted their hands, showing her charms made of black glass and white bone, tiny effigies of her face. We prayed to both flame and frost, an elder said, his voice trembling. When the world broke, your name came to us in dreams. We built our homes where neither burned us nor froze us. You made this balance, but I didn't mean to, she said. The elder smiled sadly. Meaning is for mortals. Gods simply are. That night they held a vigil in her honor. She sat among them, silent, as they sang songs that weren't songs. Low, wordless hums that made the air tremble. In their eyes she saw reflection after reflection of herself, endless, unending. And deep inside the warmth stirred again. Stronger this time. It spoke with his voice, softer, almost tender, you see? They love you. They worship you. What is a god without believers? She gritted her teeth. I won't let you rise again. The fire within chuckled. You can't stop faith, Mirin. It burns whether you wish it or not. She rose abruptly and walked to the edge of the village, staring into the endless snowfields. Her breath made ghosts in the dark. What if I go where no one can find me? She whispered. What if I end myself? The voice inside her was silent for a long time, then quietly. And leave them leaderless? They'll pray harder, and where there's prayer, there's flame. She closed her eyes. For the first time since awakening, she felt truly hopeless. Behind her, faintly, the villagers began to chant her name again. Mirin, Lady of ash and snow, Keeper of the frozen flame. The words echoed across the wasteland, rippling through the air like sparks and frost dust, and in the heavens, something ancient stirred. Not quite him, not quite her, but both. A new constellation formed that night. A single star burning white-blue, pulsing like a heartbeat, The fire that dreams had found a new shape, and it wore her face. Mirin did not remember sleeping, only falling, down through mist, through ash, through a silence so heavy it bent thought itself. When her eyes opened, she stood in a world that looked like hers yet wasn't. The mountains floated in the air, inverted, their peaks dripping molten gold. The rivers ran backward, flowing into the clouds instead of from them. The trees whispered her name in hundreds of voices, and all her own. And the air burned cold. She knew instantly where she was, inside the dream. But it wasn't hers. It was his. The first flame, the god beneath the roots, dreamed now, and reality obeyed. The ground rippled beneath her feet like breathing skin. With every step, fragments of her memories bled into the air. Her mother's laughter, the smell of rain-soaked herbs, the cries from the burning village. They floated around her like torn paper, catching in invisible winds. Why show me this? She shouted into the hollow sky. The world trembled, answering not with words but images. A girl, herself, younger, sitting by a fire, asking her mother if gods ever sleep. Lysandra's voice. They do, child. But when they wake, the world dreams with them. Now Mirin understood she wasn't walking through his mind. She was walking through the dream of the world he'd made before the first dawn, the place before creation. The sky cracked like glass. From the rift poured molten figures, humans half-formed and shimmering, their eyes blank, their mouths repeating one phrase in unison. Wake, 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 wake. They stumbled toward her, burning without screaming, collapsing into ash that rose again into their same shapes. She tried to run, but the air thickened, the horizon bending into itself. Every direction led back to the same place, a vast field of glowing roots that pulsed like veins beneath translucent earth. And at the center, a throne of charred stone. He waited there, the first flame, not in his monstrous form this time, but human, tall, luminous, terrible in beauty. His hair was black fire, his eyes twin suns. When he smiled, the world brightened, and when he frowned, it dimmed. Mirin, he said gently as though greeting a daughter, do you see now? You walk in the womb of the world. Everything that breathes, bleeds, and burns began here. Mirin's voice shook. You're killing them. The villages, the land, he rose from the throne and the world sighed. I am not killing. I am remembering. What they call destruction is merely memory returning home. She clenched her fists. You used me. You used my blood to wake, he laughed softly like a candle snuffed out. You think you were ever separate? You are flame-given form, Mirin. The final ember your mother carried before she broke the seal. You are my dream wearing human shape. The words hit her like ice. She staggered. No, I'm her daughter. I'm both, he said, stepping closer. Child of moonlight and fire, her love. My vengeance. The roots beneath them began to glow brighter, the light climbing the walls of the world like dawn trying to escape. Let me show you, he whispered. He reached out, his hand passing through her chest like light through water. And in that instant she saw everything. The birth of suns, the drowning of continents, the forging of souls in flame and sorrow. She saw how every death fed life, every scream seeded new creation. And she saw herself over and over in different ages, different names. Always the same eyes. Always the same fire. She tore herself away, gasping, stumbling backward. No, I won't be your vessel. He watched her with calm affection, as though humoring a frightened child. You already are. Each breath you take burns in my name. The field began to shake. The molten sky cracked again, raining fragments of light. From each fragment, a figure rose, countless versions of Mirin, all aflame, all whispering the same thing. He is right. Their voices layered like echoes through time, soft and merciless. Mirin fell to her knees, clutching her head. Stop it. But they kept whispering. Through her, around her, inside her. You are the dream that dreams itself. The fire god knelt before her, his hand hovering just above her brow. Let me end your pain, he said. Let us become one flame again. The world will burn, yes, but it will be perfect. No hunger, no sorrow, no end. She looked up at him, tears cutting through the soot on her face. That's not perfection. That's silence, he smiled faintly. And what is peace if not silence? Her heartbeat thundered. Beneath her skin, the light began to twist, golden, then blue, then black. She remembered the pendant, her mother's hand. Her final words, if you ever face the fire, remember, it fears the cold. She inhaled. The world shuddered. I am not your flame, she whispered. I am her frost. And she exhaled. Not fire, but winter. The dream cracked open like glass struck by a hammer. Frost spread across the roots, racing up the god's legs. His smile faltered. The warmth in the air vanished, replaced by the bitter sting of snow and wind. He screamed, the sound like every sun dying at once. You cannot freeze a god. Mirin rose, eyes glowing white. I can try. The world collapsed inward, fire and ice devouring each other, their light swallowing everything. For a heartbeat there was only nothing. Then breath. A single ragged breath. She awoke on a barren field of ash. The mountains were gone. The forest was gone. The sky was pale gray, quiet, empty, real. Her hands trembled. Beneath her ribs something flickered weakly. Not gold now, but blue-white. Cold flame, she whispered to the wind. Mother, I think I broke the world. The wind answered with silence. But somewhere far below the ground, faint and distant, came the echo of laughter. Soft, patient, eternal. The fire wasn't dead, it was dreaming again. Fire wasn't dead, it was dreaming again. They said the sound came before the smoke. A low bell, dull, distant, yet heavy enough to rattle shutters and bones. The people of hollow sleep, a village far from Mirin's ruined home, awoke to its tolling at the hour before dawn. It rang from the forest, though there was no church there, no tower, no priest to pull the rope. At first they thought it was wind caught in the cliffs. But when the second bell rang, the sky rippled, dark clouds shivering like muscle under skin. Crows fell dead in the fields, milk soured in the pails, and children began murmuring words no one had taught them, voices soft and measured like a prayer in reverse. By noon the entire town had gathered in the square. Their mayor, a wide-shouldered man named Corin Vale, ordered torches lit. It's the forest again, he said, staring toward the trembling line of trees. It's spreading. He wasn't wrong. The forest, once distant and lush, now loomed closer, as though the earth itself had bent to carry it nearer. Smoke curled from its edges, not black but pale, almost silver, carrying the faint scent of ash and salt. And beneath that, something else. A melody. It wasn't sung aloud. It was inside them. A hum in their skulls, soft at first, then rising, threading through thought and memory. Some heard laughter in it. Others heard weeping. But all felt it. The slow, steady pull of something ancient, like a tide beneath the ribs. When night came, the stars refused to show. The bell rang again and louder. The ground shook. From the forest's edge came figures, walking in single file, slow and graceful. They moved like dancers, their limbs stiff, their eyes hollow gold. Corin shouted for the gates to be sealed. But the guards never reached them. Each man dropped his weapon, turned, and began to walk toward the sound instead. The villagers screamed. The children's murmurs became laughter. The bell kept tolling, and then silence. A woman named Isla, who had been watching from her rooftop, saw it all. She said the forest breathed. Its trees exhaled fog that rolled through the streets, and wherever it touched, stone cracked. Walls bent. The air shimmered as if underwater, and in the mist she saw faces, hundreds, whispering. One of them was Mirin. Her eyes glowed faintly gold, and the roots of her hair drifted like smoke. Her voice, when she spoke, was not her own. Sleep, it said. All must sleep. By morning, hollow sleep was gone. Only the bells remained, swinging from invisible ropes, tolling through an empty plain. No bodies, no blood. Just gray dust and faint footprints leading back into the trees. Far from there, in the mountain monastery of Oris, a group of scholars sat in a circle around a dying fire. They had heard the stories. Smoke without flame, bells without towers, a woman walking from the ruins of a sunless forest. She bears the fire, one monk whispered. The witch's child, said another. Then the seal is broken, murmured their elder, eyes dim with resignation. The god beneath the earth walks again. Outside, snow began to fall. But when it touched the ground, it melted, not into water, but into ash. The elder rose, pulling a rusted key from his robes. He approached a locked chest sealed with wax and prayer. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside lay an iron dagger, its edge black as night. Prepare the riders, he said. If she reaches the capital, the sky itself will burn. That night, as the monks prayed, a figure appeared at the edge of the monastery gates. Barefoot, cloaked in mist. Eyes like eclipses. Mirin. She did not speak. She only raised her hand, and the bells of hollow sleep began to toll again, though there were no bells for miles. The iron gates trembled. The monks fell to their knees. One of them tried to speak a blessing, but his voice turned to dust in his throat. The elder alone remained standing, dagger drawn. "You carry the first flame," he said. "You are its vessel, but you are not beyond redemption." Mirin's gaze flickered, gold and blue, pain and defiance in equal measure. "I didn't choose this," she whispered. "Nor did we," said the elder, lifting the dagger. "But choice means little to fire." He lunged, but the blade stopped inches from her chest. The air between them shimmered. Light burst outward, golden, searing, and filled with whispers. The elder's skin blackened to ash in seconds, his mouth frozen mid-prayer. When the light faded, Mirin stood alone. The dagger lay at her feet, melted into slag. The monastery bells, real ones this time, began to ring wildly, as if warning the mountains themselves, but their sound twisted mid-air, warping into that same low hum, the god's voice. "You cannot flee yourself." Mirin stumbled backward, clutching her head. The mark on her chest burned, veins of light crawling up her throat. "Stop," she gasped. "Not here," but the voice only laughed. "Everywhere is here. Every breath is mine." The monks' prayer scrolls ignited one by one, flames burning blue. The snow outside glowed faintly gold, melting into rivulets that steamed as they ran down the mountain. Mirin looked toward the horizon. Far below, cities slept, unaware, peaceful. She knew it wouldn't last. The bells tolled again. And somewhere deep beneath the roots of the world, the god smiled. Smiled. When Mirin climbed out of the forest, dawn should have been waiting for her, but the sky was still dark. Not the soft velvet of night, but a bruised gray, as though the heavens themselves had forgotten how to bleed light. The horizon glowed faintly red, a perpetual twilight that refused to rise or fall. She walked barefoot through the mist, her breath forming silver ribbons in the air. The pendant was gone, melted into her skin, leaving behind a faint circular mark that pulsed like a heartbeat. Every few steps she could feel it, a flicker inside her chest, a rhythm not entirely her own. The village was just beyond the river, the same one she had left weeks ago, though it felt like centuries had passed. The cottages leaned the same way. The stone well stood crooked beside the square, but everything was still, too still. Smoke no longer rose from chimneys. No dogs barked. No children ran. Even the wind refused to pass through the streets. Mirin stopped beside the old fountain where the water had turned black. The statue of Saint Lyssara, the patron of lost souls, had cracked down the middle, her stone face split into two cold halves. One smiled. One wept, her mother's voice echoed faintly in her head. "Every village keeps a secret, child, but some secrets keep the village instead." She called out once, twice, and her voice came back broken, as though something invisible swallowed half her words. Then she saw them. The villagers stood inside their houses, visible through fogged windows, unmoving. Some sat at tables, heads bowed. Others stood in doorways, eyes wide open. Their skin was pale, lips gray. Not quite dead, but not alive either, caught in some frozen in-between. She touched the glass of one window and frost spread outward from her palm. "Mirin." A voice croaked. She turned sharply. An old woman leaned against the well. The herbalist, Marith, her mother's old friend. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her breath shallow. But she was alive. Barely. "You came back," Marith whispered, clutching a tattered rosary made of bone and string. "The forest let you go." "I found something," Mirin said. "Or it found me." Marith nodded as though expecting the answer. "It always does." She coughed, black dust spilling from her lips. "The day you entered those woods, the sun stopped rising. The children began to sleep with their eyes open. And we heard music in the ground." Mirin knelt beside her. "What happened to them?" Marith's hands trembled. "They followed it, the song. Every dawn another one would walk into the trees and never come back. Even the priests, even the dogs, until no one left but me and the dead." Mirin's chest burned. She could hear the hum again, soft, distant, like a heart buried beneath miles of earth. It was calling to her. "What do you carry?" Marith asked suddenly, eyes darting to the mark on Mirin's skin. Mirin hesitated. The light beneath her collarbone flickered once like lightning under glass. Something that wants to be free. The old woman's face twisted. "Then leave," she rasped. "Go where the wind still moves, before it takes you too." But Mirin didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the far edge of the village where the chapel stood. The door hung open. Inside, faint light glowed, golden and rhythmic, pulsing like the veins in her arms. She rose. "It's already here, Marith." The herbalist's rosary broke in her hands as she fell to her knees, weeping. "Then gods forgive us," she whispered. Mirin walked toward the chapel. Each step left a faint print of light on the cobblestone fading behind her. Inside, candles burned upside down. The altar was covered in vines, their tips glowing faintly. And behind the pulpit, the great wooden cross had been replaced, and not with a saint, but a mirror. Her reflection waited for her there, perfectly still, and when she moved, it didn't. The reflection smiled. "You can't keep pretending," it said softly. "You let him in." "I stopped him," Mirin said. "Did you?" The reflection tilted its head, and for an instant its eyes flared gold. "He doesn't need temples anymore." "He has you." Mirin raised her hand. The mirror rippled like water. The hum grew louder, the same one she'd heard beneath the roots. Only now it came from inside her. The chapel windows exploded inward, spraying glass like frozen rain. The light from her skin burst outward, snaking across the walls, burning away the vines and exposing the stone beneath. The reflection screamed, but it wasn't a cry of pain. It was laughter. Outside, the villagers' eyes opened all at once, every window, every door. They turned their heads toward the chapel, mouths opening in perfect unison. And from those mouths came the hum, the same voice, the same God, the same fire. Mirin fell to her knees, clutching her chest as golden light poured from her eyes. The hum became a song, terrible and divine. The church bells began to ring on their own, their echoes twisting into words. "You will not bury me again." The earth trembled. The sky cracked. The horizon bled red, and in that shattered twilight, the god began to rise again, not as a creature of flame or shadow, but as a reflection in every surface that had ever known her face. Mirin screamed, and the world screamed with her. Then, silence. When she awoke, the village was gone. Only ashes remained, soft, gray, drifting through the air like snow. And somewhere deep in the forest, beneath the twisted roots, something smiled through her eyes. Night returned like a bruise, deep, violet, and tender around the edges. Mirin had walked for hours without direction, yet the forest seemed to move with her, reshaping paths, whispering through unseen mouths. Every step took her deeper into a place that felt older than death itself. The light of her hand had dimmed to a faint shimmer. The air was colder here, damp with breath and memory. She could smell something beneath the moss, metal, stone, and old blood. The kind of scent the earth keeps secret for centuries. She reached a hollow where the trees twisted into an enormous spiral, their roots woven together like ribs around a heart. At the center yawned a dark crevice exhaling fog. From its depths came a soft rhythmic hum, neither mechanical nor natural, but alive. "You feel it too," Lysandra's voice murmured inside her skull. Mirin closed her eyes. "What is it?" "The place where gods were buried, and where they wait to be born again." The witch's tone was neither warning nor invitation. Mirin descended. The roots were slick beneath her palms, warm to the touch. Glowing veins of gold pulsed faintly within them, like blood beneath skin. As she climbed down, the hum grew louder, more insistent. She could feel it in her bones, tuning her heartbeat to its rhythm. At last, her feet touched stone. A vast cavern opened before her, the temple beneath the roots. The ceiling was lost in darkness. Columns of petrified wood rose like titans, carved with spirals and eyes that glowed dimly when she passed. Pools of black water mirrored the faint light of her palm, disturbed only by the slow drip of condensation from above. At the far end stood an altar of obsidian, its surface etched with runes that moved, slithering like living ink. Mirin approached. Her reflection in the obsidian was not herself. It was her mother, eyes hollow, lips moving silently. "Mother?" Mirin whispered, but the reflection only smiled. Then it bled. The black stone rippled as crimson light filled the runes, spreading outward like veins through the floor. The hum became a voice, low, resonant, too vast to be mortal. You wear her blood, it said, echoing through the cavern. And so you have come at last. Mirin trembled. Who are you? The air vibrated and the pools of water began to boil. From the largest one, something emerged. A shape half-formed from flame and shadow, crowned with horns of light. It had no face, only a mask of burning gold. When it spoke, the sound shook dust from the ceiling. I am the first flame, the heart that once gave life to gods and burned them to ash. Mirin stumbled backward. You were sealed, she whispered. Sealed, yes, by the one whose blood you carry. Lysandra's voice whispered faintly within her. I caged it, but never destroyed it. The creature, or god, leaned closer. The air grew unbearably hot, the ground trembling beneath its weight. She thought me her punishment, it said, but I was her promise. Power cannot be destroyed, only inherited. And now you will free me. Mirin clenched her fists. I won't. The golden mask tilted. You already have. Behind her, the roots began to glow violently. The runes blazed and the spiral above the cavern started to move, turning. The forest was awakening, drawn to the heart's pulse. Light poured from every direction, cascading like molten fire. The air was thick with whispers, thousands of voices, old and vengeful. Blood calls to blood, the god intoned. Your kind were born from my flame. The witches were not cursed, they were my children. The world feared you because it remembers what you are. Mirin's knees buckled as images flooded her mind. Flashes of other lives. Women burning, chanting, birthing stars from their veins. She saw Lysandra on a cliff, sealing the god beneath the earth with her dying breath, whispering her daughter's name into the wind. Why me? Mirin gasped. Because she hid me inside you, the voice thundered. Her last spell was not a curse. It was a vessel. The golden light began to seep into her skin, winding up her arms like molten vines. She screamed, trying to tear it away, but it sank deeper, burning cold. The god's laughter echoed deep and distant. You cannot fight what you are. But she did. Clutching her mother's pendant, the one she had carried since childhood, she thrust it forward. The silver charm cracked open, releasing a faint blue flame. It clashed with the golden light, hissing like water on iron. The god recoiled. What is that? Her last word, Mirin said through gritted teeth. No. The pendant exploded into light, filling the temple with blinding brilliance. The gold burned white, the air splitting with thunder. The runes shattered, the roots screamed, and for a heartbeat everything stopped. When the light faded, Mirin stood alone. The temple was silent once more. The pools were still. The voice was gone, but she knew better. It wasn't dead. It was inside her. She sank to her knees, shaking, her hands smoking faintly where the light had entered. Her reflection in the black pool blinked, a fraction out of sync with her movements. When she spoke, two voices answered. Lysandra, she whispered. No. The reflection said, smiling faintly. Not anymore. Then the sound of something ancient breathing echoed again from the dark far below the stone floor. The air smelled of fire and honey and rain. Mirin rose, her shadow splitting into two, one human, one burning. She turned toward the tunnel that led upward toward the forest. Above, the night had turned red. The roots trembled, veins of light crawling up their bark. The forest itself seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. The god was no longer caged beneath the earth, it was walking under, through her. Walking under, through her. The forest was waiting. It did not whisper, it listened. Every tree bent slightly inward as Mirin stepped through the veil of gold fog, as though bowing to something older than prayer. The path beneath her feet was not made of dirt, but of dark living roots that shifted when she walked. Somewhere water dripped with the rhythm of a heart. Somewhere else something laughed, softly like the creak of wood under snow. Mirin's breath came in small clouds. She looked down at her hands, still faintly glowing. The light was dimmer now, pulsing slower like the heartbeat of an exhausted sun. Behind her, Marrow's End was nothing but silence, a hollow memory pressed between two worlds. Ahead, the forest opened like a mouth. Where are you taking me? She whispered. Home, the voice of Lysandra murmured inside her mind, to where it began and where it always ends. The girl walked on, past roots shaped like twisted fingers, past trunks carved with faces that were almost human. Eyes followed her, glowing faintly green from the undergrowth. The fog clung to her shoulders, warm and alive. For the first time she realized it wasn't fog at all. It was breath. The forest was breathing her in. As she walked, the world changed. The trees grew larger, older. their bark scarred with ancient runes that glowed faintly when she passed. The air tasted like copper and rain. Strange flowers bloomed where her footsteps fell, white petals streaked with red veins. When she looked back, they were already turning to ash. She came to a clearing shaped like a circle. In the center stood a mirror, tall, cracked, framed in black wood that pulsed faintly as if alive. The surface rippled, though no wind touched it. She saw her reflection, but it was not herself. It was the woman from the fog. Lysandra. Her face was both terrible and kind, her hair alive with shadow. "You carry my memory," said the reflection. "But memory is not enough. You must choose." "Choose what?" Mirin whispered. "To forgive them," said Lysandra, "or to finish what I began." The mirror darkened. In its glass she saw flashes. The witch's fire, the mob's torches, the butcher's shaking hands, her mother's scream. Then another vision. A vast shape rising from the roots beneath the world, eyes like molten gold, mouth full of stars. The gods of the deep, the ones before the sun. "They wanted my power," Lysandra said, voice trembling like distant thunder. "So I hid it, in blood, in dream, in you." Mirin touched the glass. "Then what am I?" "You are the key they cannot break," whispered the witch. "But they will come for you." Even now they wake, the ground trembled. The trees shivered as if struck by wind, though the air was still. The mirror cracked down the middle, spilling out black smoke that twisted into shapes. Tall, faceless figures, their limbs made of roots and shadow. Their eyes burned like dying suns. "They have found you," said Lysandra. "Run!" But Mirin did not move. Something inside her had changed. She no longer felt fear, only clarity. The figures stepped closer, their movements slow and heavy, each footfall sinking into the earth like a drumbeat. They spoke without mouths, their voices overlapping in a low hum that shook the leaves from the trees. "Blood of the first flame," they said. "Return what was stolen." Mirin raised her hand. The mark on her palm flared to life, burning brighter than ever. The shadows recoiled, hissing. The ground beneath her split, revealing a pool of light, liquid gold swirling alive. She stepped forward, her voice steady for the first time. "You burned her," she said, "and you burned me. You called it holy. You called it justice." Her eyes glowed like twin embers. "But the fire remembers every name." The shadows lunged. The forest screamed, trees bending, roots tearing from the earth. Mirin thrust her hand into the light. The pool exploded outward, washing over the clearing in a wave of brilliance. The shadow gods wailed, their forms melting into smoke and ash. For a moment all was flame and silence. When the light faded, the clearing was empty. The mirror was gone. The trees stood still once more, their faces turned upward as if in prayer. At the center of the clearing, Mirin knelt, her hand no longer glowing, her hair streaked with gold. Then she heard it. Footsteps, not gods. Not ghosts. Humans. A small group of wanderers stepped into the clearing. A man with a bow, a woman in a hood, a child clutching a bundle of herbs. They froze when they saw her. "Are you real?" the woman asked, voice trembling. Mirin looked up, eyes shining faintly. "I think so," she said softly. The woman stepped closer. "You came from the village?" Mirin nodded. "There is no village anymore," the man frowned. "The witch's fire?" She said nothing, only looked toward the rising sun, pale and distant through the mist. "It isn't finished," she whispered. "She's still here." "I'm still here." The child pointed toward her hand. "It's glowing," Mirin smiled faintly. "Only when the world is afraid." The forest sighed, a low, endless sound, neither kind nor cruel. The golden fog swirled around her once more, wrapping her in warmth and shadow. The wanderers stepped back, uncertain. And then, as quietly as she had come, Mirin walked deeper into the woods, the trees closing behind her like a curtain. Some say she vanished, others say she became a myth. The girl who burned but did not die. The last child of the witch. But the old people in nearby towns still tell stories. When the wind carries the smell of smoke and honey. When the crows perch without fear. When the fire sings instead of crackles. It means the forest remembers. It means the witch's blood still walks. Witch's blood still walks. By the second night, fear had a face. It moved from house to house, whispered from cracked lips hidden behind prayer beads and trembling hands. No one spoke the witch's name aloud, but everyone thought it. The fog had thinned but left behind a smell. a strange mixture of iron and honey as if the air itself was bleeding. The crops nearest the woods began to rot overnight, and the crows no longer flew away when people threw stones. They simply stared, heads cocked as though remembering. At the tavern where the men gathered to drink away the quiet, the talk had turned from prayers to accusations. "It's the girl," said the butcher, red-eyed and shaking. "That Mirin child, I saw her walking the street last night. The fog followed her like a dog." The others muttered, crossing themselves. The innkeeper spat into the fire. "I and her mother's no better. Always alone. Never at church." The butcher leaned closer, lowering his voice. "She's got the witch's mark, I heard. A spiral on her hand right here." He traced a finger across his palm. "You don't get a mark like that from dreaming." Outside, the wind carried a sound, not quite singing, not quite weeping. The men fell silent. The flames in the hearth shivered as if afraid. For a heartbeat, every shadow in the room seemed to move against the walls. Then as quickly as it came, the sound was gone. When they stepped outside, the fog was gone too. Only the air was strange, heavy, watching. Above them, the moon hung low, tinged faintly red. The butcher shivered. "We burn her," he said, like they burned the first one. By dawn, the word had spread. The priest was gone, but the people had their own gods now by fear and fire. They gathered in the square, torches in hand, faces pale and hollow. Mirin's mother tried to hide her daughter, locking her inside the cupboard, whispering, "Don't move, my heart. Don't make a sound. They'll go away." But Mirin could feel the mark on her hand burning, pulsing in time with something deeper than her heartbeat. The villagers pounded on the door. "Bring the child out," they shouted. "The curse lives in her blood." The mother stood firm, clutching a knife that looked far too small against their torches. "She's just a girl," she cried. "You think killing her will stop what's already begun?" A stone struck the window. Another hit the wall. Then came the fire. The thatch caught first, then the beams. Smoke filled the air in thick black ribbons. The villagers stepped back, watching the flames with a mixture of horror and awe. But inside the house, the girl did not scream. She sat very still in the cupboard, eyes wide, listening to the crackle and roar. And beneath the noise she heard a voice, soft, steady, ancient. "Do you see now?" it whispered. "They would burn you as they burned me." Mirin pressed her hands against her ears. "Stop," she whispered. "Please stop." But the voice only grew clearer. "The fire is not your end, little flame. It is your beginning." The cupboard door burst open, not from the heat, but from something unseen. The smoke twisted around her, forming shapes. Hands, eyes, a face she knew. Lysandra stood in the smoke, her gaze both tender and terrible. "Come," she said. "Let them see what they've made." Mirin rose. The fire did not touch her. It curled away, bending backward, bowing like a living thing. She stepped through the flames and into the street, barefoot, her dress turning to ash that fell away in slow, graceful spirals. The villagers gasped, stumbling backward. The butcher dropped his torch. "She's the witch," someone whispered. "No," said another, voice trembling. "She's the fire." The girl's eyes glowed gold, not bright but deep, like sunlight buried under the sea. The mark on her hand spread up her arm, veins of light threading beneath her skin. She looked at her mother through the smoke. "You said they'd go away," she murmured. Her mother reached for her, tears streaking through soot. "Mirin." But before she could speak again, the fire leapt from the house to the torches, from the torches to the ground, from the ground to the people. It did not burn like normal fire, it sang. Every spark carried a note, every flame whispered a name. The villagers tried to run, but the fire followed, coiling around them in golden ribbons. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. When the sun rose, Marrow's End was silent. The houses stood untouched, their walls whole. But the people, every single one, were gone. Only ashes remained in their shape, scattered like shadows on the cobblestones. The air was still. The birds began to sing again. Mirin stood alone in the square, her small hand glowing faintly. Lysandra's voice murmured within her mind, soft as breath. "You are not my curse, Mirin. You are my echo." The girl looked toward the forest. The fog was waiting for her, thick and golden. Without hesitation, she began to walk. Behind her, the ashes stirred, as if something within them still remembered how to breathe. By the time the fog of Hollowmere reached the village, dawn had already turned pale and sickly. The sunlight came filtered through a veil of gray, thin and trembling. like light seen through a fever. The air smelled faintly of something wrong, a sweetness that lingered too long like spoiled fruit. The people of Marrow's End did what they always did when the wind came from the woods. They shut their windows, hung charms of iron and salt, and prayed that the mist would pass. But it did not pass. It stayed, crawling through the streets like a living thing. It filled every crack, every doorway, every silence. And somewhere beneath the hush of morning, someone began to hum. It was a child, a girl of 8, her hair the color of dark wheat, her eyes too gray for her age. Her name was Mirin, and she had always been strange. She spoke to the crows on the roof. She drew spirals in the dirt that her mother wiped away in fear. But lately she had begun to dream. Dreams of water that burned. Dreams of a woman with silver hair standing beneath the moon whispering her name.
Mirin,
The woman would say, voice like the wind through hollow bones. Do you remember me? And Mirin in her dream would always answer, no. That morning Mirin woke to find her window wide open. The fog had slipped into her room, curling around her bedpost like a cat. The air shimmered faintly with something gold. She rose barefoot and stepped to the window. There on the glass, written in dew, was a single word. Come. Her mother called from downstairs, voice sharp and nervous. Close that window, Mirin. The fog carries fever. But Mirin didn't answer. She touched the word with one small finger, and the dew turned black beneath her skin. For a moment she thought she saw another hand, pale, long, and feminine, press against the other side of the glass. Then it was gone. Down in the village square, the priest was already shouting at the people to stay indoors. His robes were soaked in sweat, his eyes wild. This is the witch's breath, he cried. It seeks the unbaptized, the impure, the unbelievers. Seal your homes. But even as he spoke, the fog thickened. The iron charms on the doors began to rust. The salt lines melted into the dirt. And from somewhere deep in the woods came a sound like a drum, slow, deliberate, ancient. The oldest woman in the village, blind for 20 years, began to weep. She's walking again, she said softly. I can hear her steps in the roots. No one listened. They were too busy nailing boards across their windows, whispering names of saints that no longer mattered. That night, Mirin dreamed again. She stood on the edge of a black river, the moon a bruised coin above her. The woman was there, dressed in a cloak of ash and flame. Her eyes were moons. Her hair flowed like mist. She smiled when she saw the girl. You have my blood, she said. The world forgot, but the river remembers. Mirin took a step back. You're the witch, she whispered. I was, said Lysandra. Now I am what comes after the witch. The child's heart pounded. Why do you call me? Because they burned me, Lysandra said, her voice soft and endless. And when they burned me, I saw every face that watched. I saw every child they stole from the forest, every mother they drowned in my name. I waited for one to be born without their God's blessing, and that was you. The river rippled with light, gold turning to red. The witch extended her hand. Come closer, little flame. Mirin hesitated, trembling, her breath a thin cloud. If I come to you, she said, will you hurt them? Lysandra smiled, not with kindness, but with a terrible gentleness that felt older than mercy. Only those who still believe they are safe. The girl's hand twitched toward hers, but before she could touch it, she heard her mother screaming from far away. Mirin, wake up! The sound shattered the dream like glass. She sat upright in bed, gasping, the fog still clinging to her skin. Her hand burned faintly with a golden mark, a spiral, the same shape she had always drawn in the dirt. Outside, the priest rang the church bell again, though no one could see him through the fog. The bell sound echoed strangely, as if muffled by something soft. Then after the fourth ring, it stopped. The silence that followed was thick as blood. When the fog lifted at dawn, the priest was gone. The bell tower door was open, swinging in the breeze. Inside, only ash remained, scattered in a perfect circle around the altar, and in the center of the circle, written in soot, were the same words the witch had spoken in Mirin's dream. Only those who still believe they are safe. Those who still believe they are safe. The night that followed was not night at all. It was a breath held by the world. Even the stars above Hollowmere dimmed, as if afraid to look down upon what stirred beneath the trees. The air was thick with the scent of burnt cedar and iron, and the fog that rolled through the forest moved with a purpose, slow, crawling, aware. Within that mist, Lysandra walked, barefoot over the damp moss, the earth remembering her every step. Her hair, once tangled with dirt, now shimmered like strands of the moon itself. She did not walk as one returning to life, but as one who had never truly left it. The forest whispered to her in broken voices. Roots groaned. Branches cracked under invisible weight, and the crows followed her like drifting smoke. In the hollow of her palms burned faint golden embers, remnants of the fire that had consumed her body centuries ago. It was not warmth she carried, it was hunger, the kind that burned the soul instead of feeding it. Each ember pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, a reminder that her vengeance was no longer a choice. It was her nature. She came upon the remains of the old chapel, now nothing more than crooked stones strangled by vines. The altar was split, but upon it still lingered the scent of incense, sweet, decaying, blasphemous. Here the priests had once called upon their god to purify her blood. Here they had sung hymns over her ashes, and here the first of them would return to her. Lysandra knelt before the altar and placed her hand upon the cold stone. Her touch blackened it instantly, cracks spreading like veins of obsidian. She whispered words older than the soil, the language of blood and memory. The wind answered with a cry that wasn't human. From beneath the shattered floor, something began to move. Bones rattled. Dust lifted. And slowly, crawling through the cracks, came the outline of a man. His face was hollow, skull peeking through parchment skin, but the emblem of the old clergy still hung around his neck, a rusted charm of gold and iron. His eyes, when they opened, were full of terror, for in death he had seen what lay beyond, and he knew her face. "Lysandra," he croaked, voice breaking like dry reeds. "You were not meant to—" She raised a hand and silence fell like a blade. "Meant to die?" she whispered, leaning closer. Her eyes twin moons reflected in his skull. "Then tell me, priest, what meaning do your gods have for my fire now?" The man trembled, trying to pull away, but his body refused to move. The roots beneath him coiled around his limbs, holding him still. "You were the serpent," he gasped. "The curse—" "And you," she interrupted, "were the knife." Her words cut sharper than any blade. The embers in her palms flared and the roots tightened. There was no scream, only the hiss of flesh turning to ash. When it was done, only a charred imprint remained upon the altar, a blackened stain that pulsed faintly as if still alive. Lysandra stood, her breath steady, her eyes glowing brighter. One of the 7 was gone. 6 remained, but vengeance was a ritual, not an act. She turned toward the forest and whispered into the mist. Her voice carried like music, but every note dripped with hunger. "Come to me," she said, "my children of the darkened wood. The feast begins." And they came. From beneath roots, from hollow trees, from forgotten wells, they crawled and stumbled, the shades of those who had died in silence. Mothers drowned for bearing the wrong child. Men hanged for praying to the wrong god. Children buried beneath the snow for being born beneath the wrong moon. Their eyes glowed faintly, their mouths stitched shut by time. Yet they moved as one, gathering around her like pilgrims to a shrine. Lysandra looked upon them, her expression unreadable. "You have slept too long," she said softly. "Tonight you will taste the breath of the living again. Tonight you will eat what once devoured you." The ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The roots split apart as the witch lifted her arms. The mist turned gold and black, swirling into a storm that smelled of burnt sugar and rot. Faces appeared in it, laughing, weeping, burning, and one by one her dead followers opened their mouths. From their throats came not words, but the sounds of the world breaking. The first shriek turned the nearby trees to stone. The second made the sky flicker. The third called something from the river. A shadow rose from the water, tall as a tower, thin as smoke. Its face was a void, but its shape was human. The witch smiled. "You remember me," she whispered. "You owe me blood." The shadow bowed, a servant recognizing its master. "It is yours," it replied, though its voice came from everywhere at once. And so the pact was sealed again. The witch who had been burned by men now commanded the very darkness they had feared. The river turned black, the sky folded in half, and Hollowmere was lost to maps once more. By dawn, the fog had devoured the valley. No birds sang, no hearths burned. Only a whisper remained, a lullaby sung by no one echoing through the trees. "Sleep, sleep, my burning child. The gods are deaf, but the soil remembers. Gods are deaf, but the soil remembers." The dawn that followed was not a sunrise, but a slow thaw of shadow. No birds sang, No wind moved, but the world seemed to breathe again, shallow and uncertain, like a child waking after a nightmare. The ruins of the chapel stood quiet, veiled in pale mist. Corin Vale sat among the fallen stones, his hands blackened, his robes stiff with soot. He had not slept. Perhaps he never would again. The ashes had cooled, but they whispered still. Every gust that passed carried faint echoes, fragments of the song she sang before the end. He had tried to write it down once, but the ink turned to dust before he could finish. Some words were not meant to live on paper. Some belonged only to the wind. He rose stiffly and began to walk. The forest beyond Hollowmere had changed. The trees stood straighter now, their bark pale as bone, their branches heavy with ash flowers, blossoms that grew only where something sacred had burned. Their scent was sweet, but beneath it was a sharpness that stung the eyes, a reminder of smoke and sin. The ground crunched beneath his boots, blackened soil still warm in places. He followed the old road to the edge of the marsh. The village that once stood there was gone. No houses, no fences, only a field of gray reeds swaying over what had been lives. He knelt, touching the earth. It was soft, too soft, the way flesh is after it's been buried too long. When he pulled his hand back, a small object came with it, a locket, half melted, engraved with a name long erased. Inside was a scrap of cloth, burned at the edges, still faintly smelling of lavender. He closed it and whispered, "I remember." From the mist, something stirred. A shadow moved between the reeds, not walking but gliding, its form bending with the air. Corin did not reach for his cross. There was no cross left to hold. He simply waited. The shape came closer and he saw her, or perhaps the memory of her, Lysandra, in her witch's gown that now looked made of smoke. Her hair floated like ink in water. Her eyes, once molten gold, were now dark and endless, reflecting only him. "You stayed," she said, her voice softer than the fog. "I couldn't leave," he answered. "It's not over," she smiled faintly. "It's never over. Curses don't die. They change shape." He looked around the field. "The land's healing," she nodded. "Healing doesn't mean forgiving." He hesitated. "Then what does it mean?" "It means remembering without bleeding." The mist thickened, curling around them. She stepped closer. He could see the faint shimmer of light in her chest, a remnant of that burning heart from the altar. "The fire sleeps," she said, "but it dreams, and when the world forgets again, it will wake." He frowned. "So all of this was for nothing?" She tilted her head. "Nothing is never nothing, Corin. It's where everything begins." He wanted to ask what she meant, but her form began to flicker, her outline breaking apart into threads of gray light. "Wait," he called. "What happens to me?" Her fading voice answered, "You become the story." And then she was gone again, not dissolved, not vanished, but remembered away. Years passed, or perhaps centuries. Time lost its meaning in Hollowmere. The land grew green once more, though no birds nested in its trees. Travelers came, drawn by tales of a village that died under a broken moon. Some swore they heard music at night, a soft, sorrowful hum drifting from the marshes. Some saw lights in the trees moving like candles carried by unseen hands. Few stayed long. Those who did were never quite the same. Among the ruins, people sometimes found carvings on the stones, words no mason had written, "Pray to the ashes." The letters would vanish by morning, and sometimes, when the fog was thick and the moon hung low, a figure could be seen near the old chapel. A man in tattered robes, face hidden, murmuring to the wind. He carried no cross, no book, only a silver locket that glowed faintly in his palm. Some called him the Ash Priest. Others said he was a ghost. The wise said he was neither, just the echo of someone who once loved too late. Children born near the forest grew up hearing the tale. Their grandmothers whispered it by candlelight, of the witch who burned for mercy, the priest who prayed to dust, and the fire that forgave no one. They said if you listened closely during storms, you could hear the two of them still, her voice singing, his voice answering, a duet between damnation and grace. But stories are strange things. They grow, they rot, they change faces. One autumn, long after Hollowmere had faded from maps, a scholar arrived from the western cities. She was young, curious, too brave for her own good. She came searching for truth, for the real witch behind the legend. She spent days in the ruins, sketching the carvings, recording the whispers she swore she heard. On the 7th night, she wrote in her journal, "The air here hums like it remembers my name. I think the priest is still here. I think he's waiting for someone to finish the prayer." That was her last entry. They never found her body, only her pen, fused into the stone floor of the chapel as though the earth had swallowed her words. And so the cycle turned again. The forest sighed. The fire dreamed. Some say the curse was never about vengeance. It was about memory, the refusal of the world to let its sins be forgotten. Every generation finds a new Hollowmere, a new priest, a new witch. Every time the story changes a little, but the end is always the same. Silence after the song, and then the whisper that begins it all again. Now, when storms crawl over the hills and the sky breaks red, the villagers of the valley still shut their windows and whisper an old warning. If the moon shatters, don't run. Don't pray. Just listen. The ashes remember everything. And somewhere in that listening, if you're very quiet, if you dare to breathe the air that smells faintly of smoke and lavender, you might hear her voice, humming the lullaby that ends the world and his voice beneath it, whispering what every soul learns too late. Forgiveness is just another kind of fire. This is just another kind of fire. When the moon broke, the light didn't vanish, it poured. Rivers of fire fell from the sky, soft as rain but heavy as sin. The world turned the color of old blood. Trees bent backward under invisible weight. Every root trembled, every stone groaned as though the forest itself were trying to weep. Corin Vale awoke in the ruins of the chapel, his body half buried beneath the shifting earth. The air was thick, and not smoke, not dust, but ash. It clung to his skin, his tongue, his thoughts. The silence was unbearable. Not the kind of silence made by absence, but one that follows screaming. He forced himself up. His lamp was gone. His book, too. Only the sound of dripping remained, rhythmic and slow, like a heartbeat in reverse. He followed it, stumbling through the broken pews until he reached the altar. The crack that had once split it now opened wide, a wound in stone glowing faintly with molten light. Inside, something pulsed. He leaned closer. It looked like a heart, but larger, blackened. Still beating, he staggered back. And from the shadows came a voice, her voice, low, distant, echoing through every grain of air. "You prayed once for the dying. Pray for the dead now." He spun around, but she wasn't there. Only her reflection in the shards of broken glass. Hundreds of her faces staring from every angle, each whispering the same words. Pray. Corin's throat burned. "There's nothing left to pray to." "Then pray to me," they answered. His knees hit the ground. "Why?" he whispered. "If you wanted vengeance, you have it. The village is gone. The moon is gone. What more do you want?" The reflections trembled, rippling like disturbed water. "Redemption," they said. "But not mine." From the corners of the chapel, the ash began to move, slowly, deliberately, as if alive. It crept up the walls, across the ceiling, gathering around the altar, and from it emerged figures, faint and flickering. The villagers, their bodies half smoke, half memory, faces twisted in recognition, in sorrow and pain. Corin watched as they reached toward him, not to harm but to hold. He felt their touch like cold wind through skin. "Do you remember us, priest?" one murmured. "You blessed our births. You buried our dead. You spoke of heaven. But when she screamed, you did not speak." He shook his head violently. "That was not me. That was my father." Another voice, and smaller, younger, replied. "And who taught you his prayers?" Corin's breath faltered. He saw their eyes. They were not angry. They were tired, a kind of tiredness that exists only in the dead. And then he saw her among them, standing apart as though the others dared not touch her. Lysandra, the witch. Her gown shimmered between shadow and flame. Her eyes glowed faintly gold now, softer than before. "You have seen what mercy makes of men," she said. "It turns them into cowards who hide behind forgiveness. I don't need your God's mercy, Corin, I need your truth." He rose unsteadily. "The truth?" "Yes." She took a step closer. "Why do you still wear his robes?" He looked down. The fabric was torn, scorched, streaked with soot, but still a priest's robe. He clutched it without realizing. "Because it's all I have?" She tilted her head. "No, it's all you were told to have." Her hand reached out, touching his chest where the symbol of his god once gleamed. It burned at her touch, then crumbled into dust. "Now you are only yourself," she said. The villagers began to fade again, their outlines dissolving into the ash. "What happens to them?" he asked. "They go where I went," she said quietly. Into the waiting dark. But the dark is nothing, her gaze met his, sad, endless. Then nothing is kinder than your heaven. He couldn't speak. The weight of her words pressed on his ribs like a physical thing. Around them the air began to hum again. The heart in the altar beat faster, louder. He realized it wasn't stone or flesh. It was the village itself pulsing with her curse. Every throb sent ripples through the earth, through him. She turned toward it. "It's almost done," she said. "The song must end where it began." He stepped forward. "If I help you end it, will the dead rest?" Her eyes narrowed. "You think you can bargain with curses?" "I think," he said, trembling, "that even curses want to be heard." For a moment she stared at him. Then slowly, she nodded. "Then listen." She placed her hand upon the pulsing heart. The sound deepened, shifting from rhythm to melody. Low, haunting, ancient. The ash lifted, swirling around them in slow spirals. He heard words in it, words older than grief, older than death. A lullaby, almost. The villagers' voices joined in, each one a thread in the tapestry of lament. The heart cracked open. Light poured out, not white, not gold, but colorless. The kind of light that erases shadows instead of casting them. Corin shielded his eyes. When he looked again, the witch was kneeling, her strength fading. "It's done," she said softly. "The earth remembers. The fire sleeps." He reached for her, hesitating. "Will you?" She smiled faintly. "No. My story ends where it began." He felt the ground shifting again, but gentler now, as if the land itself sighed in relief. The ash settled, the wind stilled. The moon, or what was left of it, shone pale and whole again, its cracks faint like old scars. Corin looked at her one last time. Her eyes dimmed, her body turning to silver dust. "Tell them," she whispered. "Tell them the fire forgave no one." Then she was gone. He fell to his knees, alone in the ruins, the silence deep and strange. For the first time in his life, Corin Vale prayed, not to gods, not to saints, but to the ashes. And for the first time in centuries, Hollowmere slept. Centuries, Hollowmere slept. The moon over Hollowmere turned gray that night, not pale, not silver, but the color of old bone. It hung low, swollen and trembling as though it strained to stay above the forest. Corin Vale had not slept in 2 days. He wandered the silent village with an oil lamp that sputtered whenever he neared a shadow. There were whispers in the chimneys, in the wells, in the throats of dead birds lying in the streets. Every sound felt like a warning too late to be useful. He stopped before the old mill where the wheel no longer turned. Its wooden spokes dripped with something darker than water. Corin lifted the lamp and froze. Faces were carved into the wood. Hundreds of them pressed together, eyes open, mouths wide, as if screaming without sound. They were not carved by hand. Their features were too perfect, too human. He stumbled back, bile rising in his throat, and as the lamplight flickered, the mouths began to move, whispering in one voice. "She remembers the fire." The lamp fell from his hand. Oil spilled, flame kissed the dirt, and the faces vanished. Smoke rose, but not from the ground. From the trees, from the sky itself, a shape moved through the haze, tall, elegant, deliberate. She wore the same dark gown, the same hair like coiling night. But now her eyes were not fire. They were voids, hollow and endless. Corin fell to his knees again. "What have you done?" Her voice was quiet, almost sorrowful. "I kept my promise," he shook his head. "They are gone." "The whole village, they are home," she interrupted, beneath the soil that betrayed them. She raised her hand and the air shimmered. He saw flashes, faces of villagers twisted in terror, swallowed by the earth, dragged into darkness by unseen roots. They belong to Hollowmere now. The earth remembers them as it remembered me. Corin clutched his chest. "Why me? Why am I still alive?" She stepped closer, and the ground bloomed with frost beneath her feet. "Because you still believe in forgiveness," she said, "and I want to watch you lose it." The wind rose suddenly, a moan through the ruins. The trees swayed though there was no storm. Shadows stretched long, curling around her form like living things. Her lips moved, speaking words older than any tongue, and the moon above pulsed in answer. The gray light deepened until the world itself seemed drowned in ash. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. Faint, broken, wrong. Corin turned toward the sound and began to run. The witch did not follow. She only smiled. He reached the chapel at the far edge of the forest, the one untouched by time, or so he thought. The doors were gone, torn off their hinges. Inside, the pews had melted into blackened shapes. The altar was split in two, and on it lay a single book. He approached it slowly. Its cover was bound in leather but warm, pulsing faintly like skin. The first page read, "The Testament of the Hollow Bride." His hands trembled as he turned the pages. Every line was written in a language that wasn't quite words, shapes that crawled across the paper as he looked. Yet somehow he understood. Each page told her story. The woman they burned for witchcraft, who was not a witch until they made her one. The rain that wouldn't stop for 40 days. The crops that rotted. The priest who betrayed her for silver. At the end of the book there was a name. His own. He screamed and threw it aside, but the book didn't fall. It clung to the air like it was alive, pages fluttering in a wind that wasn't there. The letters bled, rearranged, forming new words. The ash remembers. The moon obeys. The priest remains, the light dimmed. The walls of the chapel began to move, stone groaning as if waking from a long sleep. Roots burst from the floorboards, wrapping around his legs, his arms, his throat. He gasped, clawing at them, but they held him fast. The moonlight pierced the broken roof and fell on his face, and he saw that it was not light at all. It was dust, gray, soft, falling endlessly, and in the dust shapes moved, faces, hands, bones. The villagers, their bodies, their souls, their everything. Now dust, swirling in the moonlight like a memory that refused to die. She appeared again at the doorway, her silhouette framed by the ashen glow. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly. "They thought they could burn me, but they only freed me. The fire took my flesh, but left my voice in the roots, my heart in the river, my eyes in the moon. I am everywhere now." He could barely breathe. "What do you want from me?" "To finish what you began." "I began nothing." Her voice cracked through the air like thunder. "You wear his blood, priest. You carry his guilt. Your father's hands bound me to the stake. Your family fed the fire. The sin was never buried." The roots tightened. His ribs creaked. He tried to pray, but the words burned his tongue. "Please," he gasped. "If there's mercy—" "There isn't," she said simply. "Not for gods. Not for men. Not for me." She raised her arms and the dust thickened, swirling around her like a crown. The moon outside swelled until it filled the whole sky. Its surface cracked, glowing red beneath the ash, and then it began to bleed. The light spilled through the clouds like molten glass, painting the world in crimson sorrow. The trees screamed, the river boiled, and the earth beneath Hollowmere shifted, rising and falling like a living thing. The witch looked up, her face illuminated by the dying moon. "The curse is complete," she whispered. "Now Hollowmere will sleep as I did, buried beneath its own sin." The last thing Corin saw before the light consumed him was her smile, not of victory, but of release. Then the moon shattered. They found the first body at dawn, half buried in the riverbank, eyes open, mouth full of black petals. No one dared touch it. The fisherman who discovered it said the man looked as if he'd been pulled from the water by something that wanted him to stay silent. By noon, 3 more had gone missing, all men who had stood at the pyre that night generations ago. Their descendants carried the same blood, and Hollowmere's curse does not forget blood. The air over the village grew colder, even as the sun climbed. Candles sputtered indoors, refusing to hold flame. Dogs wouldn't bark anymore. They just stared toward the hill, their ears low, their throats trembling with quiet whines. The elders said nothing. The young mocked them at first. "Ghost stories for the weak," they laughed, gathering near the old chapel ruins to test their courage. One boy, barely 16, pressed his ear to the soil. He said he heard music. Another said it was just the wind. They both vanished that same night. The only thing found was a circle of wet earth and a single candle, still burning, though the rain had fallen all night long. At the edge of the forest stood a man named Corin Vale, the last priest of Hollowmere. Not a true priest, but a drunk who wore his father's robes like a memory. He had long stopped believing in anything, least of all forgiveness. But when he saw the bodies and heard the hum in the wind, he felt the pulse of something ancient moving through the earth. That night he lit a single candle and climbed the hill. The fog was thick as breath. It clung to his face and whispered his name. He almost turned back when he reached the ruins, but the air was warm there. unnaturally warm, like standing before a furnace buried underground. He saw her before he heard her, the shape of a woman standing where the altar used to be, her hair alive with faint blue light, her skin pale as frost. The wind didn't move her. It avoided her. Corin fell to his knees without knowing why. "You should not be," he whispered. She turned her head slowly, her eyes two burning moons. "Neither should you," she said. Her voice wasn't anger, it was absence. The kind that eats a man's courage from the inside. She stepped closer and the earth under her feet steamed. He wanted to run, but his body forgot how. "The priest's blood," she murmured. "It carries his guilt still." Her hand rose, fingers trembling, veins glowing faintly gold beneath the skin. "Do you still light candles for those who killed me?" "I wasn't born then," he stammered. I don't even believe it," she smiled. "That's why I came to you." The wind fell silent. Even the cricket stopped. She looked beyond him to the sleeping village below. "They have forgotten the song," she said softly. "But the earth remembers." He followed her gaze. Down in the valley, lights flickered in the houses, some going out, others turning strange shades of blue and gold. The river glowed faintly, as if fire burned beneath its surface. Corin could smell iron and roses. He turned back to her, but she was gone. Only the candle remained, its flame bending toward the ground as though bowing. That night, dreams spread through Hollowmere like sickness. Every sleeper saw her face. Every child woke screaming. Mothers found strange marks on their walls, spirals made of ash drawn from inside the house. One farmer swore his fields had whispered his name. Another said his well had turned to blood for an hour, then cleared again as if nothing had happened. By morning the fog had grown teeth. Corin tried to leave. He saddled his horse, packed his few belongings, and rode for the edge of the woods. But the road kept folding back on itself. The same crooked tree appeared again and again, its trunk scarred with symbols he couldn't read. He realized with growing terror that the forest was moving. The path shifted like veins pulsing with her heartbeat. When he finally stumbled back into the clearing, his horse gone, the candle from the hill sat waiting at his feet. Still burning, he dropped to his knees. "What do you want?" He cried into the fog. The air answered with her voice, to finish the song. And then the forest began to sing. It was not music. It was the sound of roots breaking stone, of bones bending, of rivers remembering their dead. Every branch swayed as if moved by unseen hands. The hill glowed from within, pulsing like a heartbeat. The soil split and light spilled from the cracks, golden, crimson, then black. The song grew louder, sharper, until the world itself seemed to tilt. Corin clutched his ears and screamed, but the sound went straight into his head, bypassing flesh and bone. He saw her again, and standing at the center of it all, arms outstretched, the ashes of her own pyre swirling around her like wings. Her mouth opened wider than human, her eyes pure fire. The earth answered her call. The chapel's old bell, long buried, began to ring from underground. Each toll shook the hill. Each toll cracked another stone. She looked at Corin and whispered almost tenderly, "Tell them I remember." And then she vanished, swallowed by the ground, leaving only silence. The light faded. The fog thinned. The forest went still. But when Corin returned to the village, everyone he met was gone. Doors hung open, fires still burning in the hearths, meals half-eaten. He called out until his voice broke, but no one answered. Only the echoes returned. His words repeated in a woman's voice, faint and distant. By the next morning, Hollowmere was empty. The birds didn't sing. The river stopped moving. And on the door of every house, written in soot, were the same 3 words. "She is awake." Same 3 words. "She is awake." They say the hills breathe in Hollowmere. On nights when the fog clings to the trees and the moon swells like a dying lantern, the air itself seems to shiver, as if something beneath the ground exhales after centuries of waiting. The villagers swear they hear whispers in the soil, a hum that isn't quite wind nor worm nor the creak of the trees. They say if you press your ear to the hill on the night of the blue moon, you can hear a woman crying, or laughing depending on how much guilt you carry in your heart. The children of Hollowmere are taught never to look at the hill after dusk. They are told to bow their heads when they pass and to never ever say her name aloud, because once long ago that name set the forest on fire. Her name was Lysandra of the Hollow Veins, the witch who sang as she burned. The last daughter of a dying faith, she was born in silence, the night her mother drowned beneath the ice-choked river. The midwife said the child's first breath came out as mist, not from her lungs but from her skin. She never cried. The world did it for her. The river burst its banks that same winter, carrying away half the village. The people whispered that the child was marked by something older than sin. By the time she was 10, they stopped saying her name. They called her the Hollow Girl. She spoke little, smiled rarely. But her eyes, they say her eyes glowed faintly in moonlight, like embers beneath snow. When her father died, fevered and babbling of voices in the trees, she vanished into the forest. For years no one saw her, though the hunters would sometimes find strange symbols carved into bark. Circles filled with ash, bones hung from branches by their own sinew. The forest grew thicker in her absence, darker as if guarding her. Then one autumn night she returned. The crops that had rotted for 3 seasons straight suddenly flourished. The river ran clear. A wolf left its kill at the village gate as an offering. They feared her, but they also needed her. They brought her food, coins, candles. She never took the coins, only the candles. She said the flame was the only thing that remembered what the dark forgot. But fear is a disease, and men always find a cure for it in cruelty. The priest of Hollowmere, Alaric of the Cross, began to preach that Lysandra was not a savior but a serpent, that her blessings were barbs, that her eyes saw too much, her blood ran too cold. The people who once left candles now left stones. Then came the night of the eclipse, when the moon turned red and the river froze mid-flow. They dragged her from her hut, bound her wrists with holy rope, and brought her to the pyre they had built from green wood and the bones of wolves. Alaric stood before her, robes black against the flame. "Repent," he said. "Renounce your name and be cleansed." She looked at him with eyes that seemed to bleed light. "You can't cleanse what was never yours to soil," she whispered. Then she began to sing. The song was older than words, older than guilt. It rose like smoke, twisted through the air, found every coward heart among them, and pressed upon it like a cold hand. Men fell to their knees, trembling, but the priest did not stop. He set the torch to her feet. She did not scream. The fire rose around her, golden and greedy, and as her hair burned, it caught the wind, carrying sparks across the village, setting the roofs aflame. Children cried. Dogs barked. The sky itself seemed to bend, and still she sang, until her voice broke into laughter. They say that laughter never stopped, that it sank into the earth with her ashes. They buried her beneath the hill, salted the soil, and built a chapel on top of it. The chapel is gone now, devoured by time, its stones scattered like teeth. But the hill remains, and tonight, under the blue moon that comes once every century, the earth begins to move again. The soil trembles, loosens, breathes. The trees lean inward, their branches pointing like accusing fingers. The air thickens, heavy with the scent of rain and rot. Then from beneath the roots a sound emerges, a low guttural hum, the kind a dying animal makes before it remembers it cannot die. The ground splits open. A pale hand crawls through, veins glowing faintly like molten gold beneath the skin. Fingers claw at the air, pulling up the rest of her, hair long and tangled, dripping with soil and starlight. A face, sharp, cracked, but unbroken. Her eyes open. The moon burns inside them. She stands, silent, naked, reborn in the grave she was given. The wind howls. The fire reignites from nowhere, and the ashes of the old chapel swirl around her like a crown. Somewhere, miles away, the church bells begin to ring, though the church has long since fallen. The villagers wake in their sleep, gasping. The river churns. The wolves whimper. And beneath the breath of the living world, she whispers for the first time in 300 years, "You thought I forgot you, Alaric?" The night exhales. The hill closes. Hollowmere remembers. Hollowmere remembers.